More alleged leaked information has come out regarding the hypothetical Mafia prequel to Mafia Definitive Edition. We're going to go over that as well as the poll that I put up last week for y'all to vote in and my opinion about the information that may or may not be true. Bear in mind, this is just leaked info, rumor. So it may be true, it may not be true. But I'm curious about what you think about the information we're about to go over. Feel free, let me know below in the comment section. So Kotaku started this whole ball rolling with an article that we went over in a previous video regarding Hangar 13 working on a prequel to the Mafia trilogy, specifically Mafia Definitive Edition. According to Idle Sloth off of Twitter, along with the Xbox Era podcast, by the way, this is what I'm sourcing, linked below in the description section. Feel free and go look over it yourself if you want. This is the information that we have so far, thanks to Idle Sloth as well as the Xbox Era podcast, that it is in fact a prequel to the Definitive Edition, set in Sicily in the late 19th or the start of the early 20th century, which means late 1890s, early 1900s, very similar to the timeline of Red Dead Redemption 2, at least the first 6 chapters of Red Dead Redemption 2. It's going to follow the family of Don Salieri, and it's going to have a quote-unquote slightly linear in style story to it. Once again, if, big fat juicy if, these rumors turn out to be true. Another thing that was talked about was that Hangar 13 Czech is allegedly working on a new Top Spin game. Now this part I don't know, because Hangar 13 Czech is more well known for working on the Mafia franchise itself from the very beginning. Mafia City of Lost Heaven when they were Illusion, Mafia 2 when they were 2K Czech, now known as Hangar 13 Czech. Hangar 13 has 3 studios total, one in California, one in the UK, and one obviously in Czech. Of all 3 studios, you think that Hangar 13 Czech would be the team leading charge on the Mafia prequel. They were the ones that did the remake, Mafia Definitive Edition, a couple years ago. And 20 years ago, under Illusion, they're the ones that launched the Mafia franchise and once again followed that up when they became 2K Czech with Mafia 2. Part of me doesn't really buy Hangar 13 Czech being left to the sidelines while the other 2 studios of Hangar 13 focus on the Mafia prequel, leaving them to work on a new Top Spin game. I just don't buy that. I think that it would be a different studio like in the UK or California that would be working on the hypothetical Top Spin game. Meanwhile, Hangar 13 Czech should be the ones, once again, working on the hypothetical rumored Mafia prequel, if all this turns out to be true. Now, if we go by the poll I put up on my community tab, by the way, thanks to everybody that voted, I asked the question, if you had a choice, would you rather the next Mafia game be Mafia 4, a sequel, following the events of Mafia 2 and Mafia 3 in, say, the 1970s, 1980s, or a prequel to Mafia Definitive Edition set in the late 19-teens or early 1920s? 72% of you voted for it to be a sequel, while 28% voted for it to be a prequel. And when I read over the comments section in the previous video, that seemed to be the case, that the majority of you would prefer the next Mafia game to be a sequel in the 70s, 80s time period, as opposed to a prequel. And there were some of you that liked the idea of a prequel and a sequel, myself included. But if the latest rumors turn out to be true, and once again, that's just a big old if, just take it as a rumor mill, nothing more, nothing less until it's officially confirmed by Hangar 13. That means that this Mafia prequel is going to be further back in time than a lot of us were speculating. It's going to be in the late 1890s, early 1900s, set in Sicily, revolved around a younger Don Salieri and perhaps even Frank as well, because they were best buds ever since they were kids. In fact, I'm going to play some quick cutscenes from Mafia Definitive Edition for a little bit of backstory.
You ever have a dog, Tom?
Sure. Little mutt when I was a kid.
When I was 8 or 9, before I came over from Sicily, I had this beautiful skinny Cerneco dell'Etna. Like a little greyhound. Fastest dog you've ever seen. That's how I met the Don. We started setting up races together. Betting on her with coins and rifle shells. There wasn't another dog that could catch her. She never lost. Until the day she did. We were only out a pocket knife, but I never saw the Don so angry.
She got old on you?
No. Pregnant. She went into heat, got out of the yard, and every dog in town had a turn.
So, what happened to the dog?
The Don tried to drown her. I broke his nose.
Frank.
More than 50 years I've known him. Everything I have, I got with Frank. Maybe he's still smarting over the dog.
The one you tried to drown?
Yeah. Same one I shot after he wouldn't let me sink her.
So a little information we do have regarding the backstory of Frank and Don Salieri implies that they met when they were probably about 8-9 years old in Sicily. I'm just going to say they're roughly the same age, and they obviously were making money, dog racing. And the other cutscene from Omerta implies that Don Salieri and Frank had known each other for 50 years. That means by the time of the late 1890s, 1900s, they might be in their early 20s, maybe, because you have to fast forward from that time period all the way to the events of Mafia Definitive Edition in 1930. By then, Don Salieri would be in his early to mid 50s, and that's the only way that you could actually kind of sort of make this timeline actually work when it comes to Frank and Don Salieri's ages by the 1930s, and then scaling it all the way back to the 1890s, 1900s time period for the Mafia prequel. A bit more information that we do have is from one of the cigarette cards. Ennio Salieri arrived on American soil in 1908. Within 10 years, he was a capo to Don Papone, the crime boss of Lost Heaven, until he died. And after that, as most of you know, the city was split between Don Morello and Don Salieri. Story-wise, this backstory, this prequel, could be very interesting and compelling if it's done right, if it has interesting characters, if we learn more about a younger Salieri and a younger Frank, not to mention other members of the Salieri family back in Sicily. Bear in mind, it says nothing about it being set anywhere else other than Sicily, which could very well imply, if true, that this game takes place prior to Don Salieri and Frank coming to America, in which he arrives by 1908. Much like Italy, Sicily is a very beautiful island, but it's relatively small, and there's obviously organized crime. The mafioso was born on that island and spread throughout Italy and elsewhere in the world. So there's definitely a lot of historical characters and contexts that could be picked and choose from in order to make a compelling story for this Mafia prequel, allegedly going to be set on Sicily. However, you have to go by gameplay. So you always have to have a balance between a good story, great characters, as well as awesome gameplay. And it's going to be, once again, slightly linear in style, very similar most likely to Mafia Definitive Edition or Mafia 2. The problem is when most people think of a Mafia game, they think of something set during the Prohibition era, like Mafia Definitive Edition, or in the 40s, 50s, like Mafia 2, or even in the late 60s, like Mafia 3, or something in the 1970s. If you set it in Sicily, that means that you'll probably won't have any vehicles, because even though vehicles did exist by the late 1890s, they were so few and far between, and the people of Sicily were probably still using buggies, wagons, horseback, and obviously walking from point A to point B. You're not going to have automobiles, most likely. So is it going to be like a version of Red Dead Redemption 2? It's an interesting concept, idea, and story, obviously. But for a video game, a lot of players expect a bit more. And when you think of the mob, you think of organized crime, you're thinking of cars, either from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, as well as the weapons from those various time periods. So obviously that's going to be another setback if this game is in fact a prequel set in Sicily. But maybe the story itself will be compelling, as well as the characters, especially if we're exploring the origins and backstories of a younger Don Salieri and Frank. Something else that popped up off the top of my head about how this Mafia prequel could actually tie into Mafia as well as Mafia 2 is perhaps it opens with Don Salieri in jail, in prison, for what happens by the end of the main story of Mafia Definitive Edition. And he's basically the narrator. He's going over the backstory where everything went wrong, the rise and fall of his crime family, as well as his desire for revenge against Tommy Angelo, and how he ended up finding out the whereabouts of Tommy Angelo in order to ultimately send Vito and Joe to seal poor Tommy's fate. Having an older Don Salieri with his final days in prison reminiscing about the good times on Sicily with him and Frank and everyone else that's going to be involved in the Mafia prequel story would be quite interesting. Now, it'd probably be an unreliable narrator point of view because you really can't go by just Don Salieri's point of view when it comes to what may or may not have happened, similar to the Joker movie. However, I think that if there was a character that should be at the center of the Mafia prequel, it should be Don Salieri himself. An older version of Don Salieri after his crime family has fallen and he's behind bars, flashbacking to his early days on the island of Sicily prior to when him and Frank arrived in America in 1908. And perhaps we'll also get that 10-year period after he got to America in 1908 when he became associated with the Papone crime family and rose up through the ranks to become a capo within 10 years, and then the death of Don Papone and the friendship between him and Morello fall apart as they end up dividing the city between the Morello crime family and the Salieri crime family. Maybe we see the aftermath of what happens to Tommy Angelo from Sarah's point of view and her kids. And so an older Sarah goes to Don Salieri's prison and confronts him and makes him realize that his own goddaughter has turned against him over everything he's done. And maybe by the end of the story, Don Salieri realizes that he ultimately was responsible for all the bad things that happened. Perhaps the game ends with Don Salieri on his deathbed in prison, asking forgiveness from those people that were once close to him. Or perhaps he simply dies with no regrets at all. In my opinion, the only way I think that this Mafia prequel is going to work is if Don Salieri himself is the protagonist, the narrator, and the quote-unquote star of the show. But since it's going to be on Unreal Engine 5, hopefully it's going to be an absolutely beautiful looking game whenever Mafia the prequel comes out, if all this information turns out to be true. At the moment, I'm on the fence. It could be true, it could not be true, but more information continues to leak out regarding this hypothetical prequel to Mafia Definitive Edition. I will obviously cover it, as always, letting you know what's out there in the rumor mill and my opinion about it, and also making the point that, once again, this alleged leaked information that's been coming out first from Kotaku, now from Idle Sloth, as well as the Xbox Era podcast, must be taken with a grain of salt until it's officially confirmed by Hangar 13. But still, it's fun to speculate. If it is set in Sicily, I hope it's an awesome linear story experience, and I hope the gameplay is awesome for what it is, but there's going to be some serious limitations when it comes to this as a Mafia prequel if it's set, once again, in the late 19th and the start of the 20th century, compared to the leak that came out many years ago of a hypothetical Mafia 4, which obviously was scrapped sometime after Mafia 3 came out. That Mafia game, I think a lot more players were interested in. But once again, that's all we know at the moment regarding any future plans for a Mafia game. For the record, I sincerely hope that we have something in the works by Hangar 13, whether it's this prequel or something set in the 70s or a completely different Mafia game entirely. Hopefully, no matter whatever the case happens to be, eventually Hangar 13 will come out with a nice fun tease and get us even more excited when it comes to the future of the Mafia franchise. Now I want you to tell me what you think about this latest bit of information revolved around the hypothetical prequel to Mafia Definitive Edition. Do you think it's legit? Do you think it's a bunch of hogwash? Your thoughts, views, and opinions, as always, welcome below in the comments section.